There are moments in a congressional hearing where everything slows down, not because something exploded, not because someone lost their temper, but because a question lands in a way that no one in the room was prepared for, including the person being asked. This was one of those moments. Pete Hegseth walked into that hearing room the way he always does, confident, prepared with talking points, ready to deflect, redirect, and run out the clock on hostile questions. And for a while, it worked. Then Pat Ryan got his 5 minutes. And what happened in those 5 minutes is something that the people in that room are still talking about. To understand why this moment matters, you need to understand what this hearing was actually about. Hegseth had been called to testify on the operational readiness of the United States military. Specifically, questions surrounding a series of decisions that had been made over the previous several months regarding personnel, command structure, and the handling of classified briefings. Critics had been raising red flags for weeks. Former officials, active duty officers speaking anonymously, Intelligence Committee members who had seen things in closed session that they couldn't discuss publicly but couldn't ignore either. The concern wasn't just policy disagreement. The concern was whether certain decisions had been made with full awareness of their consequences, or whether key information had been withheld, ignored, or simply never reached the desk of the person responsible for acting on it. That was the backdrop. That was what Pat Ryan walked in knowing. Ryan is not a career politician. He's a West Point graduate, a former Army Ranger, a combat veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. When he asks a military official a question about operational readiness, he is not asking from a position of political theater. He's asking from experience, and Hegseth knows this, which is why the first few exchanges were relatively measured. Ryan asked about specific readiness metrics. Hegseth gave prepared answers. Standard hearing procedure. Then Ryan shifted. He leaned forward slightly. He looked down at a single sheet of paper in front of him. And he asked about one specific incident. A decision made in a specific operational theater, involving a specific chain of command, that had resulted in an outcome that Ryan described carefully and precisely as inconsistent with standard protocol. He didn't grandstand, he just described what happened. And then he asked Hegseth directly, "Were you briefed on this before the decision was made?" The room got very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when someone says something outrageous. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in the room suddenly realizes that the answer to a question matters more than they expected. Hegseth looked at his team. A brief exchange. Then he looked back at Ryan. "I receive a significant volume of briefings. I'd need to know which specific briefing document you're referring to." Ryan nodded. He had expected this. The briefing was dated. It came from CENTCOM. It was flagged as requiring immediate acknowledgement from the Secretary's office. Our records indicate it was received. I'm asking if you were personally briefed on its contents before the operational decision was finalized. Another pause. Longer this time. I'd need to review the specific document to answer that accurately. Ryan looked up from his paper directly at Hegseth. "Mr. Secretary, with respect, you either were briefed on a decision of this magnitude before it was made, or you weren't. That's not a document review question. That's a yes or no question." No answer came. Not immediately. Not cleanly. What came instead was a pivot. A reference to the complexity of the Secretary's briefing schedule. A statement about the volume of operational decisions that flow through the Pentagon on any given day. A suggestion that the question deserved a more thorough answer in a classified setting. Ryan let him finish. Then he said, "I understand the complexity, but I want the committee to note that the Secretary of Defense was just asked whether he was briefed before a major operational decision was made, and we did not receive a yes or no answer." He looked at the camera, then back at Hegseth. The room noticed, quiet, deliberate, devastating. Because what Ryan was doing in that moment was not just pressing Hegseth on a policy question. He was creating a record A public, on-camera congressional record of a non-answer on a question that has a very clear answer. Either Hegseth was briefed, or he wasn't. If he was briefed and approved the decision, then he owns its consequences. Fully, publicly, on the record. If he wasn't briefed, then someone in the chain of command made a significant operational decision without the knowledge of the Secretary of Defense. Which raises an entirely different set of questions about who is actually running what at the Pentagon. There is no comfortable version of this answer, which is exactly why no answer came. Former defense officials who watched the exchange described it in notably similar terms. Not explosive. Not a meltdown. Something quieter and more serious. One described it as the kind of question that doesn't go away. Because it's specific. It's documented. It's tied to a real event with a real paper trail. And it was asked by someone who knows exactly what the answer should look like. Because he's operated inside the system being questioned. Ryan didn't need Hegseth to lose his composure. He didn't need a dramatic moment for the cameras. He needed something far simpler. A non-answer on the record. In front of the committee. In front of the public. He got it. What happens now depends on a few things. The committee has the briefing document Ryan was referencing. They've had it for some time. The question was never really about getting new information from Hegseth. It was about establishing what he would say publicly, under oath, when confronted with that information directly. Now they have that too. The next step, according to committee sources, is a formal request for the Secretary's briefing logs for the relevant time period. Not the contents of the briefings, just the logs. A record of what was received, what was acknowledged, and what was escalated to the Secretary's level. If those logs show what the committee believes they show, that the briefing was received, acknowledged, and acted upon without the Secretary's direct knowledge, then the question of who made that call and why becomes the center of a much larger investigation. And Hegseth's non-answer today becomes Exhibit A. There's a pattern emerging in these hearings that's worth naming directly. The most significant moments are not the loudest ones. They're not the clashes where voices are raised and talking points are traded back and forth for 5 minutes of television. Those moments generate heat. They trend. They get clipped and shared and commented on. But they don't move investigations forward. What moves investigations forward is exactly what happened today. A specific question. A documented claim. A non-answer on the record. And a congressman who quietly, calmly looked at the camera and said, "The room noticed." That's the kind of moment that ends up in a legal filing. That's the kind of moment that gets cited in a subpoena request. That's the kind of moment that, 6 months from now, people will point to as the day the floor started shifting. Pete Hegseth has testified before Congress before. He knows how these rooms work. He knows how to run out the clock. He knows how to give an answer that sounds like an answer without actually being one. Today, in front of a combat veteran with a single sheet of paper and 5 minutes on the clock, that playbook ran out of pages. He had no answer. The room noticed. And now, so does everyone watching.